I raised a glass to our first full family dinner in 10 years, and my son smiled as he served me a set of guardianship papers, signed by my own daughter. I wasn't ready, but I knew what to do. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 70 years old. My name is Arthur Dale, though most around town still call me Coach, because I taught a generation of boys how to keep their hands up and their chins down. I spent 30 years in the gym, whistling between my teeth, teaching discipline to kids who otherwise would have ended up in trouble. Some of those boys grew into men who became policemen, mechanics, even a mayor once. At the grocery store, I still hear Coach shouted from across the aisles, followed by a bear hug or a handshake strong enough to hurt. My wife, Teresa, used to joke that I spent all my discipline on other people's sons and not enough on my own. Maybe she was half right. Mark and Ellie grew up with a father who could be patient with other people's mistakes but was quick to snap at theirs. Teresa was the buffer, gentle where I was hard, forgiving where I was stern. She had this way of putting her hand on my shoulder during arguments with the kids, and I would know instantly I had gone too far. She never raised her voice, but she had an authority that could silence me better than any whistle. When cancer took her 5 years ago, whatever glue we had left lost its stick. The house grew quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of two people who know each other's every move, but the brittle quiet of people avoiding the same room. My son, Mark, buried himself in work, moved his family to the city, and answered my calls with the tired voice of a man kneeling under a stack of bills. My daughter, Elaine, who insists on Ellie from the day she learned to write in bubble letters, drifted from job to job and man to man, always promising the next plan would land, never letting it. I used to drive 2 hours just to watch Mark's kids play soccer, standing by the chain-link fence with a folding chair in the trunk, only to have them wave politely like I was some distant uncle. Ellie's kids barely knew me at all. I watched holidays shrink to hurried texts. I watched birthdays turn into late-night apologies. I watched grandchildren I had once held in one hand become strangers whose voices cracked on the phone because I called so rarely and they called less. And all the while, Teresa's absence sat heavy in the house. Her rocking chair in the corner stayed empty. The garden she loved grew wild with weeds. At night, I sometimes caught myself setting out 2 cups of coffee instead of 1, then pouring one down the sink before it went cold. This spring, I decided to fix it. It was not grand, just consistent. I had been saving for that sailboat she and I always promised we would learn. Instead, I took the money and spent it on everyone else. I repaired the roof on the lake house and put a new range in the kitchen. I had the porch railings sanded smooth and painted in the color Teresa called river green. I took the old shed and turned it into something I would have called a clubhouse when I was 10, but now called a family room, so the adults did not feel silly. I paid a local artist to paint a tree on one wall with big, empty branches. I told the grandchildren they could claim a branch and hang whatever they wanted from it. By April, the lake house looked as though Teresa herself had come back to dust the windows and bless the air. The boards gleamed, the kitchen smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the porch chairs stood in neat rows like soldiers waiting for inspection. I had written letters, not emails, not texts, letters with stamps and the deliberate slant of my pen, inviting everyone for the first full family dinner in years. I will not lie, I half expected silence in return, but one by one, confirmations trickled in. Ellie called and said, "Dad, it's been too long. I'll be there." Mark's reply came through Madison, his wife, in a clipped voice message. "We'll drive up Saturday morning." The twins sent me drawings of a house with smoke curling from its chimney and "See you soon, Grandpa," scribbled in shaky handwriting. That morning I woke before dawn, my body trained from decades of early practices. I brewed coffee and sat on the porch, watching mist curl off the water. My heart was restless, equal parts joy and worry. Families fracture quietly, through missed calls, small lies, forgotten apologies, and sometimes they never knit back together. I prayed mine still could. Ellie arrived first, her old Honda coughing up the driveway. She stepped out with a wide grin, a little thinner than I remembered, her hair cut short and neat this time. She hugged me so tight I nearly lost my balance. "Dad, this place looks incredible," she said, walking the porch like a realtor showing off property. Her voice was light, almost too light, like she was performing happiness instead of wearing it. She carried no overnight bag, just a small purse and her phone, which she kept checking as if she were waiting for instructions. I told myself not to read too much into it. Mark came next, later than promised, his shiny SUV crunching on the gravel. Madison emerged first, smoothing her blouse, her eyes skimming the house like she was assessing its market value. The twins ran straight for the water, whooping, their sneakers scattering gravel as they bolted toward the dock. Mark gave me a firm hug, too firm, like he was reminding himself he was in charge of something. "Good to see you, Dad," he said, though his eyes darted toward the roof, the shed, the painted porch railings, cataloging, not admiring. We gathered for lunch on the porch. I grilled chicken, corn, and Teresa's favorite biscuits, using her old cast-iron pan. The air smelled like summers past. For a while, laughter came easy. Ellie told stories about waiting tables. Madison asked polite questions about the renovations. And Mark even leaned back in his chair and laughed. A deep laugh I had not heard since he was a teenager. Still, here and there, shadows slipped through. The twins burst back from the dock, holding a fishing pole I had left in the shed. "Grandpa, can we sell these online?" Dean asked, face bright. "People pay good money for old stuff." Sarah hushed him, shooting me a quick glance, then whispered, "Not now." When I served dessert, Teresa's peach cobbler, made from her recipe card with the smudge of flour still on the corner, Madison took only a small bite, then set her fork down. "It's sweet," she said carefully, and her eyes flicked to Mark as though sharing an inside joke. And Ellie, though she smiled, though she laughed, kept her phone face down on the table, nudging it closer to her plate every time it buzzed. Once, when she excused herself to the bathroom, I caught the screen light up with an email notification. The subject line was short but sharp. "Papers ready." I told myself it was nothing. Families carry secrets. They also carry habits that look like secrets. I focused instead on the sound of my grandchildren's voices filling the house again, echoing off the walls like music. By sunset, the table was cleared, the fire pit glowing, and for the first time in 5 years, I thought, maybe this is how it starts again. Maybe the glue can still hold. As the fire pit crackled, the grandchildren roasted marshmallows with the single-mindedness only children can bring to sugar. Their faces glowed orange in the flames, laughter rising up into the dark. For a moment, it almost felt whole again. Ellie leaned back in her chair, her smile fixed, her laughter a second too late each time, like she was remembering how to act. When Sarah offered her a marshmallow sticky and charred, Ellie flinched, not in disgust but in surprise, like her mind had been elsewhere. She hugged her niece quickly and then turned to me. "Dad, you really fixed this place up. You must have spent a lot." It was an innocent enough question, but her tone had a weight beneath it. Madison caught it too. She tilted her head, watching me over the rim of her wineglass. "Yes, Arthur, this must have been expensive. You still keeping all your finances yourself?" She asked it sweetly, but the words had the coldness of a probe. I gave a small smile and said, "I manage just fine. Always have." A silence stretched thin across the table until Mark broke it with a clap of his hands. "Dad, before we get too deep into stories, there's something we should do while everyone's here. Just routine, really. Good for peace of mind." He nodded at Madison, who reached into her leather bag. She pulled out a manila folder, its corners sharp, and laid it on the table between the half-empty dessert plates. "Papers," she said, sliding them toward me. Ellie dropped her gaze to the fire. The twins stopped poking their marshmallows, watching with wide, confused eyes. I looked down at the folder. My name stared back in neat print, bold against the page. Arthur Dale. And just beneath it, words that turned my blood to ice. Temporary guardianship. For a second I thought I had read it wrong. The words blurred, swimming in the firelight. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes with the back of my knuckle, and looked again. No mistake. Temporary guardianship. The flames from the pit popped and hissed, but the sound fell away, muffled, like I had been shoved under water. My chest tightened. The folder's edges seemed sharper, the print darker, as though the whole thing had been waiting in the shadows just to leap out at me now. Here, at my table. Mark was talking, his voice warm, almost casual. "Dad, it's just paperwork. Nothing serious. With you getting older, it's better to have things in order. Protects you. Protects us." I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came. My tongue felt thick, useless. I looked at Ellie. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her thumb tapped her phone under the table, a nervous tick she hadn't noticed giving her away. "Just sign," Madison urged softly, her hand sliding the pen across like a dealer pushing chips in a poker game. Her smile never wavered, but it had too many teeth. "It's for your safety. You wouldn't want any accidents with the house, the accounts, all that responsibility." My heart pounded. My skin went clammy. I tried to steady my breath, but the air caught in my throat. The firelight blurred, the porch swayed, and the voices around me tangled together into a low hum. I clutched the arm of my chair, but it wasn't enough. A wave of dizziness washed over me, harder than any punch I'd taken in my boxing days. My knees buckled as I tried to stand. The last thing I saw was the twins staring, marshmallows dripping from their sticks onto the dirt. Then the ground rushed up to meet me, and everything went black. When I came to, the room was dark except for the glow of a lamp. My head pounded, my throat dry as dust. For a few confused moments, I thought I was back in the gym office after a long night, asleep in my chair. But then the voices reached me. "Doctor's note would help. If he fainted once, it'll happen again. That proves instability," Madison was saying. Her tone was low but sharp, the way a knife sounds when it cuts into wood. "Dad's stubborn," Mark replied. "We can't waste time. If he changes the accounts or locks things down, it'll be harder later. The petition's ready. Ellie signed already." "I know," Madison said. "We just need his condition documented. The fainting, that was perfect. We'll call it the first incident." Their words clanged in my ears, each one heavier than the last. I tried to shift, but the blanket pulled tight around me like a restraint. My body felt sluggish, my limbs weighed down. I glanced around the room, my own bedroom at the lake house. The curtains were drawn, the dresser cleared of the photos of Teresa I usually kept there. Ellie stood near the doorway, her arms folded, head bowed. She didn't speak, but the way she chewed her lip told me she was already drowning in guilt. She caught my eyes opening, widened her own, and for a moment I thought she might say something, but she looked quickly away. I forced my throat to work. "Mark," I croaked, my voice dry, cracking like old wood. He turned, startled, then pasted on a too bright smile. "Dad, you're awake. Don't worry. You just overexerted yourself. It happens. You need rest. We'll take care of everything." The words chilled me. "We'll take care of everything." Madison stepped forward, holding a glass of water I hadn't asked for. "Here, drink this. Don't strain yourself. You don't have to worry about bills or the house or anything anymore. That's why we're here." I pushed the glass away with a shaky hand. My body was weak, but my mind was burning hot now, sharp and clear. I saw it for what it was. They weren't waiting, weren't hesitating. They were already moving the pieces while I lay there flat on my back. My collapse had given them exactly the excuse they needed, and they thought I was too broken to stop them. I forced myself upright, ignoring the way my chest thudded in protest. My hand trembled as I gripped the edge of the nightstand, but my voice, when it came, had iron in it. "Enough," I said. The room froze. Madison's smile faltered. Mark stiffened, his face pinched as if he'd been caught stealing. Ellie's eyes darted to mine, wide and wet. "Dad, you need to rest," Mark began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "No, I need to speak, and you're going to listen." I pulled the blanket from my legs and planted my feet on the floor. My body wobbled, but I stood, leaning on the dresser for balance. The photographs of Teresa had been moved, hidden away, and that more than anything made my blood boil. "You think a fainting spell means I've lost my mind? You think a man who coached 3 generations of boys, who buried his wife and still kept this family standing, doesn't know what's happening under his own roof?" I jabbed a finger at the folder lying on the dresser. "That paper is not love. That's theft dressed in ink." Ellie flinched, tears already in her eyes. Mark's jaw set hard, his fists clenched at his sides. Madison stepped forward as if to talk, but I shook my head. "Don't. You've said enough." I drew in a shaky breath, gathering what strength I had left. "You've got one chance, right now, to step back, to admit you lost your way. Tear those papers up, look me in the eye, and be the children your mother believed you could still be. Do that and we can find our way back. Ignore me, and you'll find out just how much fight an old man has left in him." The fire in my chest burned hotter than the weakness in my legs. For the first time all evening, the silence in the room was mine, not theirs. Ellie sobbed softly, covering her face with her hands. Mark looked at Madison, his expression tight, like he was weighing the odds of a fight he hadn't expected. Madison's eyes narrowed, calculating. I kept my gaze steady. One chance. That's all." Mark broke the silence first. His voice was steady, but it carried that smug edge he'd picked up after years of city deals. "Dad, stop pretending this is about honor. You collapsed. You can barely stand. You said it yourself. You've held this family up for decades, but it's time someone else took the reins. That's what this is." Ellie lowered her hands from her face, tears streaking her cheeks. For a moment I thought she might crack, that she'd side with me. But then she shook her head slowly. "You don't understand, Dad. You've been so stubborn. You never ask for help. You never admit you're getting old. We just can't keep waiting for you to pass out again or worse." Her words pierced deeper than Mark's arrogance. Madison stepped forward, her voice cold and clear, each syllable clipped like she was reading from a script. "This isn't theft. It's protection. You might not want to admit it, but you're vulnerable. And we have a responsibility, as your children, as your family, to make sure your assets in this house are handled properly. If you won't sign willingly, the courts will see reason, especially after tonight." The gall of her, standing in my wife's house, in the room where Teresa's photographs had been pushed aside, talking about courts and assets as though I were already in the ground. I steadied myself on the dresser, staring at each of them in turn. So that's it. My own blood, circling like vultures. Teresa would be ashamed. Mark's mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. Ellie's shoulders hunched, but she didn't move. Madison folded her arms, unflinching. The verdict was clear. They had chosen their side. I let the silence stretch until it was heavy enough to press down on all of us. Then I nodded once, slow. "All right, you've made your choice." Inside, my fury coiled tight, cold and sharp as a blade. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought feigning meant finished. But I was still Arthur Dale. And I hadn't coached boys into men, hadn't survived Teresa's loss, just to be cheated by my own kin. That night, I lay in my bed with the taste of betrayal still bitter on my tongue. The house creaked softly, the lake outside lapping against the dock, but sleep never came. Instead, I turned over plans in my head the way I used to turn over fight strategies. I would start with the lawyer in town, an old student of mine who owed me more than one favor. I still had all my account books, the deeds, the receipts, proof that I was in control and not some doddering fool. Then I'd reach out to Pastor Miller. He knew my health better than anyone, and his word carried weight in court. Every piece slid into place like chess moves. They wanted to make me the king trapped in the corner, but I knew how to turn pawns into queens when it mattered. But then, before the first move could even be made, something unexpected happened. It began with Madison. At breakfast, her face was pale, her hands trembling as she tried to sip coffee. Within minutes, she was rushing to the bathroom, the sound of retching echoing through the hall. By noon, Ellie was doubled over on the couch, clutching her stomach, sweat dripping down her temples. The twins stopped laughing and lay limp on the rug, their voices faint as they complained of pounding headaches. Even Mark, who always prided himself on his stamina, staggered out onto the porch and collapsed onto a chair, his skin clammy, eyes glassy. In less than a day, the whole family was sick or stumbling into trouble. Madison's phone buzzed nonstop with frantic messages from her firm. Something about a fraud audit gone public. Her name splashed in the news. Ellie's latest boyfriend had called the police, accusing her of theft. An officer left a message demanding she come down to clear things up. It was as though every piece of the polished facade they'd built cracked at once. And there I was, the old man they thought too weak to stand, the only one in the house still steady on his feet. I moved through the rooms with a grim kind of calm, tending to them as needed, but making note of every weakness revealed. For the first time in years they looked at me not as a burden, not as a man in decline, but as the only one who could keep the whole thing from caving in. I realized then I didn't even need to lift a hand in anger. Fate or God, or maybe just life's cruel balance had already done it for me. By the second night, the lake house no longer sounded like laughter and clinking glasses. It sounded like a hospital ward. Doors opened and shut, footsteps dragged across floorboards, groans echoed in the hall. The twins lay curled on the sofa with damp cloths on their foreheads. Ellie barely moved, whispering for water between fits of shivering. Madison was gray and silent, too weak even to hold her phone. Mark, my son who thought himself stronger than me, sat slumped at the table with his head in his hands, mumbling about bills and deadlines he could no longer manage. Through it all, I remained standing. I fetched blankets, brewed tea, wiped foreheads, and called the doctor myself. When the old country doctor arrived, he nodded at me, not at Mark, not at Madison, and said, "Arthur, you're the only one holding this place together. Keep doing what you're doing. They'll pull through." That moment hit the family harder than my words ever could. When I returned from walking the doctor to his car, I found Mark staring at me, his face lined not with arrogance but with something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Dependence. "Dad," he rasped, voice hoarse, I don't know what we'd do without you." Ellie reached out weakly from the couch, her fingers brushing my arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes red but clear now. No phone to hide behind, no excuses to give. "You're stronger than all of us put together." Even Madison, the sharpest of them all, lifted her head from the pillow, too exhausted to wear her practiced smile. "Arthur," she said quietly, without the usual calculation in her tone, "you saved us. You're saving us still." For once, the respect in their eyes wasn't the thin paper imitation they had used at the table, not the polite nods meant to hide their greed. This was raw, true, born from the undeniable fact that when everything fell apart, the old man they had tried to sideline was the only one still standing. I sat at the head of the table, the fire low in the hearth, their tired faces turned toward me, and for the first time in years I felt Teresa's presence at my back, as though she were standing there, smiling, reminding me, this is what family is meant to be. They had betrayed me, yes, but in their sickness, in their weakness, they remembered who had carried them, who still could, and now they would never forget. The storm rolled in 3 nights later, hard and sudden. The power went out with a snap, plunging the lake house into blackness. Wind hammered the shutters, and rain pounded the roof like fists. The twins screamed from the living room, their fever still lingering, and Ellie stumbled in the dark, nearly falling down the stairs. But the worst came when the water line rose. The lake swelled with the downpour, creeping higher until it spilled over the dock and pushed against the foundations of the shed. By midnight, the backyard was a shallow river, and the family room I'd built was already filling ankle-deep with water. Mark panicked. He tried to haul the twins upstairs, but his arms gave out halfway. Madison shrieked at him, pointing uselessly at boxes that needed saving. Ellie froze in the hallway, clutching her phone even though there was no signal. It was chaos, leaderless, weak. That's when I stepped in. "Quiet!" I roared, my voice cutting through the thunder. The same voice that once silenced 20 boys in a sweaty gym. For a moment, they all froze. Children again, listening to their father. "Mark, take your wife and kids upstairs, now. Ellie, grab blankets and water, then stay with the children. Madison." I fixed her with a stare sharp enough to cut glass. "You're with me." No one argued. We moved fast. I waded into the freezing water, hauling sandbags left in the shed from years back, stacking them along the back door while Madison held the flashlight. My arms burned, my back screamed, but I didn't stop. When one of the bags split and water surged in, I braced myself against the frame, my body the barrier, until Madison pushed the last bag into place. By dawn, the storm had eased. The house stood firm. The children were safe, dry upstairs. The damage was real, but it hadn't taken us. When I came back up, drenched and shaking, they all looked at me in silence. Mark's eyes were wide, stripped of his usual defiance. Ellie hugged her children tight, staring at me as though she'd never seen me before. Even Madison, proud, calculating Madison, bowed her head, not in shame this time, but in recognition. I leaned on the stair rail, my voice gravel and steel. "Do you see now? Without me, you'd all be washed out to the lake. Don't ever mistake my years for weakness again. I am this family's foundation. Always have been. Always will be." No one spoke. But I didn't need words. Their faces told me everything. They weren't pretending anymore. They had seen what I could still do when it mattered, and there was no scheme, no paper, no courtroom cleverness that could erase that truth. From that day forward, the balance was set. They might whisper, they might resent, but they would never again look me in the eye and think me lesser. I had reasserted dominance, not through threats, not through law, but through the raw, undeniable proof that I was still the only Dale who could carry the family when it mattered most. And respect won, like that doesn't fade. The storm had broken them, but I knew storms pass and memories fade. If I let them walk away with nothing more than gratitude, their greed would return the moment the skies cleared. So I called them together at the table, the same table where they had slid those guardianship papers across to me only days earlier. Now the folder lay in the center again, but not as a weapon against me. This time, it was evidence. I had spent the morning digging in my office, pulling records, account statements, and copies of Teresa's will. Every number, every signature, every receipt was there, ironclad. I spread them out slowly, letting the silence settle like dust. "You thought you could declare me unfit," I said evenly, my eyes sweeping across each of them. "You thought one fainting spell meant you could steal from your own father. But this," I tapped the papers with a steady finger, "is the truth you can't hide from. Teresa left this house in my name. The accounts are secure under my signature. The land? Paid for by my sweat decades before any of you had bills of your own. And I've already filed notice with the lawyer in town. These documents are untouchable." Mark's face drained of color. Madison looked down, her lips pressed tight. Ellie shifted in her chair, tears filling her eyes again. "You wanted guardianship?" I leaned forward, my voice low, iron hard. "What you will have instead is accountability. From this day on, no more half-truths, no more secrets, no more circling like vultures. If you want a place at this table, you earn it with honesty and respect. Betray it again. I let the words hang, heavy and final, and the law will come down on you harder than I ever could. The room was silent except for the creak of the house in the wind. Then I stood, tall and unbroken, and pointed to the family tree I'd had painted on the wall in the clubhouse. Its branches were still empty, waiting. This was supposed to be for Teresa, for the grandchildren, for all of you. She wanted us bound together, not torn apart by greed. If you still want that, if you still believe in her memory, then claim your branch. Hang something true. But know this, you'll do it on my terms, not yours. They didn't argue. They couldn't. They sat in silence, their faces pale, their ambition cracked by something stronger than any storm. The hard truth, laid bare, undeniable. For the first time in years, I felt Teresa's presence settle in the room. Justice hadn't come through anger or through fists. It had come through truth, sharp and sudden, like a lightning strike that burned away every lie. And my children, who had once thought me weak, now sat before me, not as schemers, but as a family chastened, forced to see the man who had built the foundation they still stood on. I had wanted to reconnect them. I had wanted to bring them back. I hadn't expected betrayal, but I had turned it into something more powerful, dominance wrapped in justice. This time, they wouldn't forget, because some lessons are whispered, and some, the ones that last forever, are hammered into the soul by the hard truth of justice.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.